Did you know? Over 100 games for the Nintendo 64 never saw the light of day, and in these videos, we'll touch on every single one of them. However, we won't be including games that had an N64 version planned but saw a release on other platforms, such as Dragon Quest VII. We also won't be including games that were reworked into a new game, such as Dinosaur Planet, which ultimately released as Star Fox Adventures. We're also not including rumored games with no evidence to back them up, such as the rumored Timber the Tiger game from Rare. In short, we're only showing truly cancelled titles. Since we're talking about a Nintendo system, we might as well start with Nintendo's own games. One of the most discussed N64 games that never released was Super Mario 64 2. Following the release of Super Mario 64, a sequel was underway for the 64 disk drive add-on. Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto wanted to take advantage of the system's storage capabilities and implement ideas that were absent from the original game. In an interview with Nintendo Dream in September 1997, Miyamoto said Luigi was already in the game and that simultaneous multiplayer was on the cards. In Volume 104 of Nintendo Power, the Ask Dan segment also said a rideable Yoshi was another feature in the game. By 1999, sources such as Famitsu claimed the sequel would be released that year, but in reality, the game didn't get far along before being shelved. This wasn't the only cancelled Mario game for the N64. The Mario Artist series of games was planned to have a few more entries. In addition to the Mario Artist software released for the 64DD, there were 4 more titles in development. These games were Graphical Message Maker, Game Maker, Sound Maker, and Video Jockey Maker. Little is known about them, but given their descriptive names, it's assumed players would be able to create music videos, send virtual greeting cards to friends, and even make their own video game, likely with heavy limitations for each one. A number of these games were also planned to go online through RandNet. As mentioned in our video on the released Mario Artist software, Sound Maker spun off from a proposed feature for Mario Paint Studio, but due to many complications behind the scenes, it was shelved, alongside the 3 other titles. Another cancelled N64 game that generally goes unnoticed is Emperor of the Jungle. Emperor of the Jungle was based on Osamu Tezuka's long-running series Jungle Emperor Leo, or Kimba the White Lion. This licensed game was being developed by Nintendo in a joint venture with Tezuka Productions and overseen by Shigeru Miyamoto. Osamu Tezuka's eldest son, Makoto Tezuka, also served as the game's director. A demo of the game was first showcased at Space World 96 in a press conference featuring Miyamoto, Tezuka, and Nintendo Communications Director Hiroshi Imanishi. Early reception for the game was positive, and the game was set to bring in a new age of adventure games. It was aiming for a spring '98 release, but in an interview during E3 that year for Brazilian magazine Nintendo World, Miyamoto said the game ran into some issues. He said Tezuka was extremely busy and not a game designer by trade, though Nintendo gave him advice wherever possible. The title was set to be completed for 1999, but by the time the Game Developers Conference rolled around in March that year, Miyamoto had more bad news. IGN had asked him about what project he believed was his biggest blunder, to which he replied, "I cannot tell you specifically what title it was, but a while ago we asked a popular celebrity to become a game director, and together with me he was going to make a game. But that celebrity was too busy to concentrate on game design, so even though we spent a lot of time working on the game, we could not release it to the market." It's safe to say he was referring to the fate of Emperor of the Jungle, which was quietly swept under the rug by the end of the year. Coincidentally, an earlier Kimba game was also cancelled, being made for the Famicom in 1990. One cancelled N64 game you've probably never heard about before was the oddly titled Cabbage. Cabbage was a virtual pet simulator game first announced in 1997, being made by the likes of Miyamoto, Shigesato Itoi, and Tsunekazu Ishihara. According to an interview from 64 Dream magazine, the name stemmed from Itoi, who had randomly blurted out the name one day and it ended up sticking. Satoru Iwata also had a hand in the project, and it apparently flew under the radar of company president Hiroshi Yamauchi. Cabbage was being developed for the 64DD, as Miyamoto wanted the game to have a clock function, where events could occur when the system wasn't powered on, such as your creature evolving into a different creature. It was also planned to work with the Game Boy Transfer Pack, with players being able to transfer the pet and carry it around with them, similar to Pokémon. The game's release would have been followed up with additional discs that had extra toys for the creatures to play with, which could be swapped with friends. Cabbage was planned to have a playable showing at Space World 2000, but nothing ever surfaced. Although Cabbage was cancelled, some of the game's ideas were used in other Nintendo titles, such as Animal Crossing, Nintendogs, and possibly more. He also recalled Itoi and Ishihara being rather busy with other things at the time, such as Itoi working on the ill-fated Mother 3 for N64, and Ishihara overseeing the then newly formed Pokémon Company. Nintendo also had a number of smaller games planned for their 64 DD add-on. One title, named DD Sequencer, was some kind of music creation software that appeared on RANDNet's homepage. Nothing else is known about it, though the title was listed next to Mario Soundmaker on RANDNet, implying it was an entirely separate game. Another game was also listed on RANDNet called Digital Space Newspaper. This title would have given 64DD users access to news related to horse racing, baseball, and Formula 1 racing. Considering the title would likely have displayed in 240p or 360p, reading long articles through this service would probably have become tedious fairly quickly. Another title, named Wall Street DD, was made to simulate the ups and downs of the stock market, and was quoted by IGN as the killer app of the 64DD. Now, although that's all of Nintendo's cancelled first-party offerings, many cancelled games were made in collaboration with Nintendo. The elusive title Catroots was developed by Marigal, a company partly owned by Nintendo. Footage of the game was shown off at E3 2000, featuring a cat and mouse engaging in cartoon violence, in this case the cat being hunted down by the mouse. The demo showcased some impressive animation for the console, but didn't give a solid indication of what the game's genre would be. The game didn't make any notable appearances outside this showing, and was never seen again. Another canned N64 title was a basketball game called Monster Dunk. The title was in development at Mindscape, one of Nintendo's partners under the Dream Team label when the N64 was codenamed Project Reality and Ultra 64. It was announced at E3 95 and was set to have stunning effects produced by Silicon Graphics workstations. Monster Dunk was described as a haunted NBA Jam, with famous monsters facing off in 2-on-2 matches and court hazards like hands coming out of the floor to grab the player's legs. By late 96, Mindscape ran into financial difficulties and cut back on their video game output, with Monster Dunk being one of the cancelled games. Another company that worked closely with Nintendo during this era was DMA Design, who would later become Rockstar North. The studio made a few unreleased games with input from Nintendo. The racing game Go-Karts never had an official reveal and went away as quietly as it came. All that's left of the project are a few prototype images of racers, karts, and a presumed logo for the game itself. It's speculated that Nintendo was the publisher. A more ambitious project DMA had in mind for the system was a title called Zenith. During development of one of the studio's other projects, Body Harvest, a game under the name Climber started to make the rounds. With only the name to go on, some speculated this was a game based off of the NES title Ice Climber, though it was more of a racer. The game was said to be published by Nintendo and had a mix of platformer and racing elements, being described by one developer as a vertical obstacle course. The locations of the races would range from medieval times to the Wild West. The aforementioned Body Harvest was going through development issues, and the studio had to come to a tough decision. Body Harvest was the studio's top priority, meaning Zenith had to be put on the back burner. Some members of the Zenith team moved over to Body Harvest, while several others left the company altogether when frustration reached a boiling point. Still, the decision to cancel Zenith ensured Body Harvest came out at all. One of the most lamented losses to the N64 library was a Pokémon title, which went under the name Pocket Monsters RPG and sometimes called Pocket Monsters DD. It's thought the game would have been in line with the main Pokémon series, but for home consoles. The only first-hand mention of it was in a 1997 interview with Miyamoto, conducted by Electronic Gaming Monthly. When asked about the game's progress, he said 10 people were currently working on the game, and that while it was planned to come out in Japan, a US release was still up in the air. In a 1998 IGN article, the site listed 4 upcoming Pokémon N64 games: Pokémon RPG, Hey You Pikachu, Pokémon Snap, and Pokémon Stadium, implying Pokémon RPG was an entirely different game than Stadium, despite both being turn-based. Another studio with a close relationship to Nintendo is the legendary Rare. One canned title, Velvet Dark, was planned to be a sister title to Perfect Dark. It would have fittingly focused on Joanna Dark's presumed sister, Velvet, expanding on her character and the overall Perfect Dark universe. As opposed to the series' FPS roots, this game was said to be more of a third-person adventure game with elements of stealth, taking a page from Metal Gear Solid. Development started sometime in '99, and a trademark was filed for the game in January 2000. Just 1 month later, news broke of Rare registering the domain velvetdark.com. Pre-production was was done on the game for roughly a year, but it didn't go any further than that, never getting the official green light. The cover of the game's design doc was later uploaded to Twitter by designer Greg Males in July 2015, with a marked date of October 30th, 2000. Though he didn't share the details of what was inside, the table of contents gave a few clues as to what was planned. Some of these ideas include plot details, a multiplayer mode, and connectivity with the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. Speaking of canceled games with Game Boy connectivity, the Wars series had an entry planned for the N64, developed not by the usual Intelligent Systems, but rather by Hudson Soft, who made a few Wars entries on Game Boy. Similar to other games in the series, such as Advance Wars, the game used a 2D map for moving troops during gameplay. It also had two-player support and was planned to connect with Game Boy Wars 2 via the transfer pack. Players would be able to start a match on the 64, keep the battle going on Game Boy, and go back to the 64 to finish it. The game was shown at Space World 1999 and was set to be released on January 29th that year for a retail price of 6,800 yen. It's not known why it was cancelled, but it seems to have gotten pretty far along in development. Developer Real Time Associates was making an RPG titled Mystics for the N64, though it's unknown just when it was being made. The NES World website documented a blurb about what the game might have entailed from the studio's president, David Warhol, dated to February 19, 2008. According to him, the game was all about real-time spellcasting. Up to 4 players would collect mana based on water, earth, sky, and air to use it offensively or defensively. The game also had a single-player mode centering on this mechanic, and Illusion Machines was brought on to assist with game design. Nintendo had commissioned a prototype, but allegedly backed out not long after. The company had considered reworking the game as a WiiWare title years later, but nothing came from that either. Another cancelled game was a third-person adventure title named Rika, which was being developed by Bit Studios with Nintendo as publisher. The Rika name first surfaced October 27, 1998, when Nintendo of America registered the domain name Rika.com. In April 99, Nintendo Power would confirm the domain was for an upcoming title. In the game, players took control of a female character named Rika, with comparisons being made to both Tomb Raider and Rare's Perfect Dark. The game was playable at E3 '99 and was on track for a 2000 release, but come the new year, Nintendo hadn't shared any more info. Bit Studios told IGN things were going smoothly, but no further updates came out, and there were rumors that Rika had shifted over to the GameCube. In June 2016, footage of the game surfaced online, uploaded by a user on the Assembler Games forums who worked at Bits in the late 90s. In addition to this, he clarified the game was more of an adventure title akin to Ocarina of Time, having sprinkles of open-world gameplay and 3 playable characters. The reason it was cancelled was due to the N64 nearing the end of its life cycle by 2000. He also said Bits was a small studio and were working on 2 other games, with the higher-ups deciding to cancel Rika and reallocate the team to other projects. The unreleased title Klepto was a stealth-based adventure by Utopia Technologies and Sandbox Studios. One of the game's developers, Atman Binstock, wanted to make a third-person game featuring a grappling hook, inspired by the Umihara Kawase series. It would have been set in a sci-fi world, and missions could be tackled in multiple ways, sneaking into a room undetected, or throwing caution to the wind and fighting your way out of a jam. The grappling hook would interact with enemies and could be upgraded with different weapons and gadgets. A playable demo was put together for E3 1999, and multiple parties, Nintendo included, showed interest in publishing the title, but ultimately backed out. Nintendo did suggest they bring the title over to the GameCube, but the team's budget didn't allow for it. The N64 had several canned titles from Paradigm Entertainment, who had a close relationship with Nintendo. The company had its roots in making realistic flight sims for various clients, some involving space travel and military training. Nintendo contacted the company in '94 to assist with a launch game for the N64, and Paradigm took it upon themselves to convert another piece of software titled Vampire XDV-7 to the N64 as well. XDV-7 was visually impressive for the time, likely because it was a military training sim. Screenshots from the sim were sent to magazines, boasting the N64 could faithfully recreate the visuals. In reality, the title was running on the Silicon Graphics Onyx Reality Engine, hardware more advanced than the N64. It's believed XDV-7 was put on hold so Paradigm could focus on making Pilotwings 64 with Nintendo. Following Pilotwings' success, Paradigm's entertainment division spun off into its own company, solely focusing on game development. One of their next projects would be a follow-up to Pilotwings 64. On June 18, 1997, IGN reported on a statement from Paradigm during E3. Head of development Gary Bandy simply said, "There will be a sequel to Pilotwings, and Paradigm is working on it." They also said the game was in its early stages, and there were talks of releasing it on the 64DD, though by February '98, the game tentatively titled Pilotwings 64-2 was shelved. The reason for cancellation was due to Nintendo having their hands full with other projects. They couldn't provide resources despite seeing promise in the game. Another canned game from Paradigm was Harrier 2000, to be published by the Japan-based Video System. It was a flight sim originally named Flights of the UN. A preview of the game in GamePro's October '98 issue said it was roughly 60% complete. They also said the game would release in December, before it was pushed back to summer '99 in the US and fall '99 for the UK. It also received another name change to Harrier 2001. Despite the game's progress, Video System told IGN the game was put on indefinite hold that November. In December, IGN obtained documents relating to a lawsuit Paradigm filed against the publisher earlier in May. The suit mainly referred to a lack of resources and finances provided by Video System, with Video System telling Paradigm to cease all production on the game on April 16, 1999. Another flight sim that never saw the light of day was F-18 Super Hornet. Published by Titus and developed by Digital Integration, the game was set to have accurate flight physics, realistic graphics, and a two-player battle mode. It was planned for a late '99 release, but was cancelled before it could take off. Other sim games planned to come to the system included XSW1, which was in development at Video System. The only proof of its existence comes from the name showing up on a release list of upcoming titles in the April '97 issue of N64 magazine. Based on the name and the developer's portfolio, it was likely planned as some sort of flight or war title. The game Lethal Encounter was in the works at British studio Digital Image Design. Like Paradigm, Digital Image had their hand in flight sims, with notable clients including the Royal Air Force and British Airways. Lethal Encounter was a third-person action title, with its only showing in the August '98 issue of Edge magazine. The blurb about the game described it as a mix between Turok and Battlezone, with elements reminiscent of Star Fox 64. Every one of Digital Image's titles had been published by Ocean Software from 1989 to 1998, but in '98, Ocean merged with French publisher Infogrames, becoming Infogrames UK. Following the takeover, several key members of Digital Image left the company, including co-founder Martin Kenwright, who formed Evolution Studios in '99. It's assumed Lethal Encounter was a casualty of the buyout, as no further updates surfaced. Developer GameTech revealed Robotech Crystal Dreams shortly before the N64's launch. Based on the '80s sci-fi anime of the same name, the game featured four-person multiplayer, rumble support, and over 40 minutes of voiceover spanning 15 characters. Originally slated for a late '96 release, it was pushed back to '97. That same year, GameTech ran into financial troubles, filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. By late '97, only one person was still actively working on the game, with the rest of the studio working on other projects. Despite all this, GameTech assured fans Robotech was alive and kicking, with all hands on deck come January '98. The game was shown at that year's E3, but there was still much uncertainty behind the scenes. Robotech struggled to find a publisher, with GameTech considering self-publishing, even with the odds against them. By July '98, however, the dream was dead. A former GameTech employee told IGN, "We came in on Monday, July 20 to work as usual, and there was a sign on the door saying GameTech was closed due to bankruptcy. We were allowed to pick up our personal belongings, and that was the end. GameTech ran out of money." Not all was lost though, as following GameTech's closure, a developer acquired an N64 dev kit and dumped Robotech's ROM online, being the build from E3 '98. One mysterious cancelled N64 game is Ohcouchi Gengorou Ikka. Practically nothing is known about the game's subject matter, but in 2005, a prototype cartridge of the game was sold at a Japanese auction for roughly 57,000 yen. Only a few screenshots of the game were posted online, but based on the images and brief blurbs about it on Japanese blogs, it seems to have been some kind of family simulator. Developer Culture Brain had plans for a baseball title called Ultra Baseball 64, an entry in their baseball simulator series. It's not known when it would have been released or why it was scrapped, though it's likely to have stayed in Japan Japan. Culture Brain's USA division was responsible for reworking the studio's games in an effort to appeal to Westerners. Despite their efforts, their games sold very poorly in the West. Keeping to the theme of sports, Soccer 64 was being developed by Hudson Soft. The game was only ever mentioned in the UK-based N64 magazine in April '97, shown in a list of then upcoming titles for the console. It was listed as to be announced for Japan, with no release date for other regions, so it likely didn't get far in development. The 64 disk drive was planned to be the home for a title called Desert Island 64. It centered on players surviving on a deserted island, taking elements from RPGs, platformers, and real-time simulators like The Sims. It was first shown off at Space World 96 under the name Super Real Island. Developer Imagineer's plans to set their sights on the DD effectively shot them in the foot. On August 2nd, 1999, IGN reported the game resurfaced under a new name, Desert Island, saying the studio was wondering whether to make the game for the base N64 console or carry it over to Sega's then upcoming Dreamcast system. It's believed its cancellation was due to Imagineer running into financial issues at the time, with Desert Island being affected by this. All that survives of the project are a handful of screenshots, a few pieces of concept art, and scans from 1998 issues of German magazine Nintendo Funvision, as well as text from an unknown magazine. Make sure you tune in next week for part 2 of this series. But did you also know that Link's Awakening for the Nintendo Switch had been successfully emulated on a PC before the game even released in the USA? Or that Joy-Cons originally connected to the Switch via magnets? For more facts, check out our video on Nintendo Switch secrets and censorship.